So I'm Alan Twomey and I'm a researcher in Tagus Moor Park. And just before I go on, I'd just like to say a lot of this work was funded by the Department of Agriculture through the Green Breed Project. And as already been said numerous times, I'd just like to say this was a collaboration between Tagus, ICBF and Abacus Bio. So I suppose firstly, my talk's going to be on giving the updates to the beef sub-index in the EBI. But let's firstly give a bit of a background. So firstly, I suppose there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years on the beef coming from the dairy herd, on the decline, maybe the concerns of a bobby calf industry and all these talk. And I suppose the big challenge for dairy farmers was to make sure they had a calf that was saleable and also that a beef farmer was willing to take these calves and they could make a margin from. So when we then looked at the genetic trends, and when we actually saw this, and over the last 10 years, due to our breeding objective, we were seeing there was a decline in our beef traits coming from our dairy cows. Maybe not as large as many people were talking in the media, but there was a decline all the same. So over the last 10 years, carcass weight has reduced 10 kilos genetically, and as well as this, we also saw a 0.2 unit decrease in conformation score. And what this led into is a reduced number of animals hitting our carcass specifications. And maybe I'll talk about these a bit more later on in the presentation. So I suppose we're now, the big thing is this is the EBI, it's for our breeding dairy cows. So why do we actually need a beef sub-index in our EBI? So till recently, and it's continually increasing, that the national kill of beef animals in this country, the origin is coming from dairy cows. So that's either beef cross dairy or dairy cross dairy animals. They're the growing population of our beef industry. So it's really important that we continue to ensure that our dairy cow does not diminish this beef quality coming from the dairy herd. And then I suppose the other big question I often get is, well, with sex semen, we're going to have no more dairy bull calves. So why does the EBI need to have a beef component? Sure, all my calves will be off a beef bull. And like the Minister said earlier, it's very important that we continue to make improvements in the beef bull used. But the beef bull is only half the equation, that calf is 50% of its genes are coming from its mother, and the other 50% is coming from the beef bull. So we don't want just all the improvements in our beef bull to be diminished by a decline in our dairy cow. So we need to ensure that dairy cow maintains a relatively good beef merit. So I suppose just what the changes we made, and there was 3 main changes we made to the beef sub-index in the EBI, and that was first the inclusion of an age of slaughter trait. And it's been said by Jonathan on how this is reducing carbon, but there's also an economic benefit. And then we also said there's a number of animals falling out of spec coming from the dairy herd, so we included traits to ensure more animals were falling into specification. And finally, our economic values for beef traits hadn't been updated since 2013, so there was a big need to change these. So age of slaughter. So currently our national age of slaughter coming from our beef industry is 28 months for steers. But we see a large variation around this. Some beef farmers can achieve much sooner than this, with down to 18 months, but where we see they might be going into a 24-month system. But we see the majority of farmers, beef farmers, are carrying these up to older ages, around that 30-month mark. And the big challenge here is they're not able to get them fleshy enough or get them to the factory soon enough because they don't have the actual genetic merit to achieve this. So like I said, there's an economic and environmental benefit with age of slaughter. So Jonathan really mentioned here on how our carbon sub-index includes age of slaughter, and what that's doing is that for every day reduction in age of slaughter, we improve the overall carbon efficiency of the overall system, but there's also an economic benefit. And these are coming from, so for every additional day, there's maintenance of that animal on the farm, there's an extra day of labour, facilities, capital, depreciation, increased vet costs, and the costs continue. So up till now, maybe it was a limitation of our actual our beef breeding indexes. We never had an age of slaughter trait, and that was a lot of due to this was there was a large amount of research to get this off the ground, and now to recently we have an age of slaughter trait, so we can now genetically identify animals that are going to finish sooner. So what it really means is these animals that have a lower breeding value for age of slaughter are going to be fleshier, so they're going to be easier for the beef finisher to finish. They're going to need less concentrates to finish off, and more animals are going to finish off grass, and they're going to be an overall, like I said, economic and environmental benefit. And additionally, just like the carbon sum index, that's the first in the world, this is also going to be in a cattle breeding objective. This will be the first time age of slaughter has been in a breeding objective for cattle. So a big challenge with age of slaughter, and a lot of the concerns coming from maybe the beef industry was, well, if we just reduce age of slaughter, we're just going to have a smaller animal that's going to be more fleshy, and that animal won't really reach our carcass specifications. But what we can see here, I just plotted our current AI dairy sires, and if we see on the left axis here, this is their genetic merit for carcass weight, and on the bottom we have age of slaughter for a genetic merit for age of slaughter. So what we want is, we want beef bulls that are good for age of slaughter and high for carcass merit. And what we can actually see, there's actually very little linkage between them. There's very little correlation, as we say. So what we can see is we can breed for these two traits very easily. And also I'd like to add here is there is a large variation across breed, but also within breed there's big variation within the breed. So we can see the green dots there are more our British Friesian type. The orange dots are your Holsteins, and where you can see the black dots is your Jersey population, as what you'd expect. They have a lower carcass merit, but they also have take longer to reach age of slaughter. But again, there's variation amongst all these breeds. And maybe just to focus the mind on what we're trying to achieve, and maybe we haven't achieved now because we were lacking this age of slaughter, is to get those bulls, is the breeding, and after generations of breeding, we're breeding for both these traits together. We hope to shift these beef bulls, or the dairy population, as well as not having a decline in our dairy traits, is to get them up into that top left corner. Is those are the bulls that are good for carcass weight and age of slaughter. So I just suppose to focus just on the Holstein Friesians, and this is just the exact same as I previously presented, but these are just your Holstein dairy bulls. And what we can see is there's actually very little difference in carcass weight, but there's a huge difference in age of slaughter. And if we take two dairy bulls and they have the exact same carcass weight, and there's 25 days difference, and at a cost of 135, and this is 135, this is averaged over the whole year of a beef animal, that's a €34 saving for the beef farmer. So there's €34 less cost for the farmer to take the bull on the left compared to the right, and he gets the exact same carcass weight. So then, as I opened up the presentation, I said that we were getting more animals were falling out of specifications. And what I mean for specifications is there's three main ones. You have a conformation specification, so animals have to reach a target of O equals or better. They have to hit a fat score of between 2+ and 4 equals. And also maybe there's a bit more conversation around this one, but it's definitely with discussions with the beef industry. This is really where they want and where they're going to pay in the future is they want carcasses to fall within a 280 and a 380 kilo carcass weight. And what we can see here is just looking at the current population, and this is broken up into the beef cross dairy population and the dairy population. We currently have about 20% of our dairy population falling out of spec on carcass weight, but we've up to 70% falling out of spec for that conformation. Like I said, where these price penalties are, this is where we started putting costs of with a bull that was higher probability of progeny falling into the out-of-spec categories, these bulls were penalised for this. So what it really does is it improves with beef bulls with good in-spec, that are good for in-spec, it improves the probability of their progeny to actually reach these carcass specifications. And finally, is what we did was the economic update. So like I said at the start, these costs, the carcass value, hadn't been updated since 2013. So we went back and we looked at the last 5 years and what was the actual economic value of carcass weight. And looking at steers that were in O equals, they were on average at 382 over the last 5 years. But as you can see, beef has actually really increased in value in the last couple of years, and we felt this was actually a poor reflection of the beef value because breeding programs are where the industry is going for the next 5-7 years. So we actually put a €450 economic value on carcass weight. And this is compared to, it was only $290 up to now. So there's going to be more of an economic weighting on carcass weight to reflect its actual value. But on the same side, there is an increased cost for reaching these carcass weights. So for every kilo you put on, there's a growth cost, so that the animal needs more energy. And there's also a maintenance to keep that kilo gained. So that has to be reflected in our breeding values, so we put in a cost to reflect this. Previously up to now there was a 55 cent per kilo cost, but with the increased cost of feed and such, this is increased to 0.73 in the indexes going forward. So this is going to be a 258 kilo cost on an actual carcass weight, because it was them 73 cent is on a live weight, and on average it's a 50% of a kilo our dairy animals achieve. And finally, I suppose age of slaughter, and I kind of already said this, that we've a cost for every day increase, there's a €135 cost per kilo. And what this is actually done is, and obviously it's different throughout the year, whether they're finished off grass or in beefs or in the inside, it's averaged over the whole production cycle, so over the whole year, it's averaged of the costs. And finally, our confirmation has also increased, so the value of this confirmation has increased. And what our confirmation is based on is for every increase in confirmation, you get more meat yield from that animal, more high-valued cuts, and that value of those cuts have also increased. So this is going to increase from €10 up to €13 per unit increase. So just to say, well, we've made all these changes, what does it actually achieve? So I just did a validation study, and what that means is I looked at dairy steers and I took their information out of the evaluation and I predicted based on their genetic merit. So 46,000 steers that were slaughtered in large beef herds in 2021 and 2022. And again, their genetic breeding values for beef traits were just based on their ancestry information. So first, I suppose we had to look back to see what we actually achieved. And actually, we were actually doing a relatively good job. Our old beef subindex was actually getting a good improvement on carcass weight. So what I have here is the difference between our bottom 20% and our top 20% on the old beef subindex. So they were making a relatively good difference on carcass weight of 15 kilos heavier for that top 20%. And there was an increased number of animals hitting that specification of 3%, and there was also more animals of that top 20% hitting the confirmation spec. No difference in our animals reaching our fat spec, but there was also an improvement in age of slaughter, but relatively small. There was only 4 days between our dairy bulls that were really good for beef compared to the ones that were really poor for beef traits. Now, where are we going forward? With these updates, with the new economic updates, with the new traits, what can we actually achieve? There's going to be still a difference on carcass weight, but obviously the intensity pressure will have reduced due to other traits in the index, and this is going to reduce slightly, but we're still getting a relatively good difference between our top and bottom of 12 kilos. We're getting an increased number of animals still reaching that carcass specification. we're getting a higher increase in conformation specification and also more animals falling in that specification. But finally, I suppose the big one is this blue index on the top and bottom, we're getting a 20-day difference. So there's much more animals, and these animals now we're selecting for beef traits, they're going to reach this carcass specifications at a younger age. So what this means is where the real updates, and maybe it's relatively small currently, but with breeding we're going to be able to find out with these new traits, the breeding program will be able to make these differences even bigger. But what we can see is the new beef subindex will build bigger divergence in our dairy population. So it will be easier to select for these traits. We'll have a more probability of animals hitting that conformation spec, more fitting that fat specification, and most importantly, there's going to be a larger divergence in age of slaughter, so it's going to be easier to pick, and we're going to make larger improvements in age and slaughter of animals coming from that dairy herd. So just to summarise on what I've over the presentation, I suppose with the new traits and the economic costs, this better reflects what's actually being paid to the beef farmer and what his actual costs. So up to now, we never actually had a cost on age of slaughter, so this new beef subindex will better reflect on what actually happens on the ground. And like I said, carcass specifications, animals falling out of spec is a big cost for beef herd owners, so if we can improve the number falling into actually hitting these carcass specs, there's going to be more economic value for that beef farmer. And so then we've also increased the variation. So what we can see is there's going to be a larger divergence in this beef subindex. So there's going to be a €50 difference between your top and bottom 20%, but where previously we only had €29. So what this is going to allow is we're going to have breeding programs going to be allowed, we're going to be able to select, but you're better able to identify these high value, these dairy bulls that are high value for beef without detrimenting dairy traits. And what it also does is, on the other end, it will have a more negative impact on the extremely bad. The dairy bulls that are extremely bad for beef traits, it will really penalise them harder. And then finally, and I suppose it's going to be picked up later with Andrew, but this aligns all our beef indexes. Up to now, we had different traits in one index compared to another. So our dairy beef index, our commercial beef value, will now all have the economic value, all the same economic values and all the same beef traits. So it'll be more comparable to use our beef subindex across all these traits. And I suppose just finally, with on top of this, and Andrew will say it again, is with on top of this, to improve the beef coming from the dairy herd, we also need to increase that usage of our dairy beef index, of the beef sires we use. So that's all from me, and I'll take any questions later on.